You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number, and an engineer will be right with you.
Welcome back to Data Center Therapy, a podcast from Ivoxy Consulting that talks all things IT with a healthy dose of empathy. I'm your host, Matt. Don't tread on my network, Yette, and alongside me is my co-host, Matt Cozzolino.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning. Each episode, we dive into a wide range of technologies that make up this beautiful sandbox called IT that we all play in. We share our hopes and dreams, opinions both positive and critical alike, all with a touch of empathy. Because at the end of the day, we all need a seat on that couch. And some of us, early morning, need a seat back in bed, I think.
Yeah, I can get behind that sometimes.
Present company excluded, of course. But today we want to talk about security. And I know that's kind of like this, what flavor, what area, what kind.
Yeah.
But I think, Matt, you put it, and I questioned you in the notes. You took this copy-paste from a class you did on microsegmentation, and you crossed out microsegmentation and put security. And I asked you, what, and I got the wink that you were really, because that's what it is.
It is.
The questions apply. They apply. And you should not be focusing narrowly necessarily on any one thing, at least to begin with. It's the security posture is an overall.
It's a broad question. When we talk about microsegmentation, it's focused because we're taking a look at a tool, but really it's a question of what are you trying to accomplish in your environment when you talk about security.
That might be my most asked question in any aspect of my job, in my career.
What's that?
What do you? Because we get so focused on the solution.
Right.
We look for the problem. Here's a hammer. Where's a nail? Where's a nail? Where's a nail?
What's the problem we're trying to solve?
Right. And when you break it down that way, I also find that to be the most efficient way to be frugal with your dollars, too.
Yeah.
Listen, I got this shiny new hammer. Oh, but we use screws. We don't use nails here. Oh, but it's a shiny hammer.
But look at it. It's cool.
Yeah. So that's been also my route of solutions architecture and design, but troubleshooting also helps. It helps me get on the right path, I think.
Yeah. On the troubleshooting aspect, it's really important to be able to frame a problem with a clear issue and a clear break, especially when you're like calling support or something. I try to do X and I expect Y, but I get Z.
Yeah,
look, I can reproduce it.
Hard facts. I do this and this happens every time or only once. Can you repeat it? Well, I think something changed. I think last night. No. I appreciate the thought to try to give me your mindset, but I need to go to hard facts, what happened, and go from there. Otherwise, I can't trust it to be true because I think a lot of things too that I'm not certain of.
Right.
You can't operate off of that, but you could go down, the rabbit hole in the wrong direction.
You have to be able to reproduce it to be able to test it to make sure that you've solved it or not.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So we got it. That was a little tangent. Okay.
Well,
security. Yeah. Security. Bring me back, Maddie. Bring me back.
So, I mean, that's the same kind of thing. That concept of, what is the problem we're trying to solve is the same kind of thing that you want to look at when you talk about security. And a lot of these things that we hear in the industry, microsegmentation, for example, SD-WAN is another one that I hear. They have a solution, but they don't necessarily define the problem for you. Right.
Boy, that's huge because our own Mac Nethkin, who we've had on the pod a few times, have talked about this with SD-WAN. What are you trying to accomplish? Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to spend a lot less money. I'm not going to have these. I'm not going to have these expensive circuits anymore. I'll just use the internet. Boom, done. And even the SD-WAN vendors themselves will tell you this is not about necessarily cutting your bill. It might work out that way. It might be a nice byproduct of it. But overall, you're just shifting dollars. You're not necessarily saving any. But you do gain the ease of configuration and hopefully that security at that layer and the simple ability to get your sites tied together.
Yeah, it's I years ago, after doing a couple of firewall cutovers, I had this idea that every project takes about the same amount of time, and it's either work up front getting it right before you do a cutover, work after the fact doing the cutover. And I see that apply to dollars spent on technology. Either I'm buying a solution to reduce my management cost, or I'm going with a cheap thing that I'm building in-house and I'm going to spend more on
Labor.
management, right? Yeah, and
Right.
it's this balance, and ultimately it's the same amount of weight on the scale. As far as security goes, there's a lot of different pieces that go into I'm going to say, holistic security posture, right? Microsegmentation is not the one thing that's going to solve everything. A good antivirus is not the one thing that's going to solve everything. A robust firewall, the best in the world firewall, is not the one thing that's going to solve anything. All of these components together and how your organization works with that technology is what makes your environment secure.
That's a really good point.
Right?
And components that allow you to analyze post-mortem in the case of a failure of your posture, right? Which is, almost certain. It's multi-layered, but you made a point of in past conversations you've talked about layer 8. It's funny, you usually don't want to start at such a high level. You actually do have to get that mentality in a row before you start thinking about the building blocks you're going to put in place to actually, affect your approach to security.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things that what the internet was built on, that open standard. Everyone can talk to anything. I can talk east west. Everyone auto fixes all of that, and I feel like that's where a lot of devs exist still these days, right?
Oh wow, that is so true. As I'm side programming here for another website I have on the side, I'm just like, whatever, ram it in, it works kind of thing sometimes. If the internet came up and there were all these stringent security protocols in place, who knows if it would have ever gotten off the ground, right?
Right, yeah.
Instead, let's get A to talk to B to talk to Z. Wow, it works! And oops, 30 years later.
Right. Even now, I'm working on some VPN stuff. And you read through the guide, and it's, set up your VPN, IKE 1, Phase 2, Phase 1, do your tunnel, do your this, write your firewall rule, allow any source destination, right? And you put it in there, and the goal there, it makes sense. The goal there is let traffic flow. Now that we've established the one piece, now we can step into the next piece.
Turn that knob down.
Now we can restrict it a little bit further.
Who knew? You think the internet would have gotten off the ground if they foresaw Facebook and Twitter? I think they'd just throw their hands up and say, you know what, let's learn how
not go
works.
there. 'Tis a
let's
silly
start
place.
building cars instead. Let's just change it altogether.
Yeah.
I think we all would have been better off for that. So, there, like you mentioned, these layers and these building blocks, and you're right. I'm sure I knew that in some point in my heart, Matt. But the way you verbalize that in terms of, you can have a great antivirus and it doesn't. It's not it. That's not the end all be all. It's so true.
One facet.
And it's difficult because it's maybe one of the only areas where there are so many different cooks in the kitchen, so many different components, but and they all do very different things, and yet the failure of one of them can ruin the entire recipe. Like my storage array, right? I have a good storage. I get a great storage array. It's all flash, this and that. My storage is probably pretty much set. Now, there's backup to consider and this and that, but storage itself providing capacity is narrow, right?
Yeah, it's scope of what it's trying to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And I could solve that with a vendor probably. But security is one of those things where it's remarkable how many layers there are, and you really have to have an approach and a plan, or else let's say you even throw in all the right layers, best of breed at every step, but nobody's puppeteering it.
No one's sitting there watching it, managing it, paying attention to it. The care and feeding of these things are important.
Right, and understanding how they work together too, because you could miss an alert that's really, prescient. Oops, and not realize what you're looking at.
Yeah, there's a couple of different things that go into that though, right? You've got these different security tools that can create roadblocks for getting the work done, right? My firewall isn't allowing the traffic, so I can't. Meant to turn that off earlier. My firewall isn't allowing the traffic, so I can't I have to deal with that firewall first before I make sure that the client antivirus allows the application to run. Right, both of those have to exist. On the getting stuff done, but also as a positive, right? If your antivirus misses something, then your east-west traffic may be blocked by the firewall. So that's where it also is. You have to make them all work together, but it's also the individual components.
They have to be autonomous in their own way. If they depend on the antivirus and the antivirus fails, now everything fails.
Mm-hmm. That's where that defense in depth kind of concept comes in, right? So microsegmentation for your security firewall between your components, your servers, antivirus on your endpoint to make sure that that endpoint is secure and not running malicious code, and multiple different layers of them, so that if something gets past one, you still have another check. It's kind of like, I don't know, I assume like walking into the Pentagon, you've got to go through security like 6 times, right? That kind of a thing.
Well, it's also difficult because, very few companies have unlimited dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a budget. You have to get your money's worth. There is a limit. So at the same time, you can't look, on one hand, you can be a complete stickler and say security is a zero-sum game. It is, you're either all in or you are vulnerable. And even all in could be vulnerable. Or you could make the argument that, look, I'm doing the best that I can. I have limited number of dollars, and I have to prioritize where I put my efforts in. And you can see, you can make both arguments there. But it's at that point, how do you prioritize? Is antivirus more important than security at the network layer? Layer 2 is, host intrusion. Do I do multi-factor? Like, where that's a difficult part, is saying, well, what's your strategy? What level of risk are you okay with?
Right. And that's kind of where that layer 8, that management piece, makes a difference, right?
And how that dovetails, I think, with ease of deployment too. Like microsegmentation, the approach, not necessarily the installation, but actually implementing it correctly. Like you said, most of these things take a similar amount of time. What's the shortest path to getting me the most secure? I think is what a lot of customers probably want to know the answer to.
Well, right. And I mean, focusing on microseg for a second, it takes a day or two to get like NSX installed. It's actually fairly straightforward.
Well, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
It's like Ryan Gruck will attest to this. VDI, VMware Horizon View. That's easy installing it.
20 minutes.
Messing around with your Windows images and group policies and app layering. Oh my goodness, that is the work. The actual product, getting it in. Yeah, hey, great. Now use it. Now use it.
Right. So that's the piece where it takes that buy-in from management, buy-in from the security folks, understanding that, kind of changing that mindset of, I'm deploying this thing, I gotta go talk to security, needs to change to, okay, I'm deploying this thing, so to deploy this, I need to get security in here so that we can have that conversation, so they can do their piece, so we can affect these other things.
And just the feeling I get from you describing that situation to me, it's hard to fault people for the mistakes that they make, because that sounds dreadful. It does. But that's why I think, IT is the trusted group, or should be the trusted group, because they hold themselves to that higher standard, and they just have to go through it and have to be sometimes the one to say no without giving off that stereotypical no, move, the no, IT thing.
Yeah.
Not no because you're on high, no because you have a responsibility to the fiscal health of the company, not to let your stuff get, crypto locked.
Right. So you put that security hat on. No, nothing gets to talk to anything. It's really easy to just, blanket deny everything, but there has to be some flexibility there.
We still need to sell a widget. How does that work?
Yeah, you still have to support that application. You still have to make that thing work, and that's the facilitation piece that has to happen. But yeah, it takes buy-in from everyone, and there's not a single component that does anything. I've spent a lot of time with NSX and how that works. And that's the one I'm most familiar with, but there's, like we've talked about already, much more than just microsegmentation or device-based firewalls, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of multi-factor, that's one of the things I want to talk about too. It's a small bit. You're seeing it more and more. It's small, meaning it's probably one of the easier things potentially to deploy, but you're really talking about end user things at that point, and that extends to maybe bring your own device and endpoints you cannot control as easily. Is multi-factor one of those things that everyone should look at? Is it really disruptive in terms of, well, I'm going to have to do an awful lot of work to get there? Or is that just a no-brainer thing that everybody should be doing?
I think there's kind of two pieces to that. You talked earlier about the dollar that a company has to spend and what do you spend that dollar on, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can do in-house. Simple things like turn off telnet, turn off require more secure passwords, turn on multi-factor authentication. I think the bigger piece around that is kind of taking a look at the broader scope and finding that we define the need for multi-factor as a requirement from the organization level as a policy, and how do we get there? You can turn on multi-factor in a bunch of individual components and have 6 different factors that you have to use in 6 different places to log in. Or you can, again, spend some more management time to, set up a Okta or a Duo or a forward web proxy to have everyone log into this dashboard using a single login and right? It's a question of how you get there. To specifically answer your question, I think multi-factor is a good idea. I think it should be something that you try to turn on if you can, right?
Yep. And really multi-factor, a lot of ways it's treated is you either have a hardware token or your phone becomes that token. But I don't think that's necessarily communicated that well in whose fault that is. I don't know. Could be my fault. We had a coworker of ours on the sales side of things. We had implemented MFA on our email, and it just so happened he was out of town, and phone broke, something, and went to set up the Microsoft account 365 and log in. No, he couldn't. He didn't have a phone number associated with his account. So the MFA was only through the app, and he'd already registered the app on this now broken phone. Apparently, there's a process to migrate the registration of the phone as the token over to a new phone, but that doesn't work if your phone just happens to go, I quit today.
Right. So the backup, how do you get back in there? How do you reset that password?
Right.
What do you as the administrator do? Yeah.
That was a bit of a mess. So it's things like that sometimes it's like, yeah, this is great. Let's flip the switch, turn it on. You have to foresee that potentially there's the user interaction piece, that the education still needs to happen layer 8, like you mentioned. Matt, one thing that blows my mind, and it goes way back to the days, and they're still obviously around and very, a strong presence in the industry, is like Splunk. But I always thought about it like, oh, it's huge. Oh, it's expensive. Oh, and then you've got basically that goes towards the SIEMs, the security information and event management.
I had to look up that acronym.
Yeah, how am I not supposed to have my eyes bleed looking at a SIEM console? How does this become digestible and actionable and help? I'm drowning in logs.
Right. How? I don't know. I think that we've talked about some components, like should I run email in the cloud? Should I run this as a hosted service? I think that might be one of them that makes the most sense to do, right?
Well, you're saying that, Matt, but at the same time, well, it's not like it's not your problem anymore. You're worried about somebody attacking your email server on your network and thus infiltrating the rest of the network. By moving it to the cloud, yeah, that risk pretty much is no longer an attack vector. But your email data itself is still, you haven't any more secured it than if you could control it yourself, as far as you know.
Yes.
I mean, you're putting trust in a third party.
You're putting trust in a third party, and
and they never get hacked, right?
There's you can't just blanket, say that I can do this better or I can't do this better. There has to be some level of trust and understanding that you're going to go to someone and pay for a product and they're going to give you a good product, right? The same thing, you take your car in for service, you trust the dealer you're taking it to.
I agree, but tell me how many times you've had to interact with a third party, a human, call up on the phone. What are the odds that they're going to screw that up? Read all of the breaches. That, I mean, it's astronomically depressing how common these, password and credentials and the insurance companies losing, and identity theft, all of that. It's happening all over the place. I think at the same time, you've got people running headlong sprint into the cloud. Like, oh, don't worry about all of that. That can't happen to the cloud.
But it can.
Oh, certainly can. Yeah. And I mean, the breaches that we've seen have been less systemic and more individual to a customer who have set their access keys to whatever, or public default bucket and this and that. But, it doesn't mean that it can't happen at the platform level either.
Right. And I think the biggest difference there is kind of like who you as the customer are, right? So you run a website, right? It's you managing the entirety of that environment. Is monitoring a SIEM an additional component of work that you want to do, or is it more efficient to pay for a service that is monitoring that and trusting that? As your organization grows and you start to have multiple sites across the world and you start to have more specialized needs, it may make sense to run that internally and hire FTEs to do that specific job, right? That's kind of the trade-off there, is who's doing that work and how do you navigate that amount
just
of
popping
work
in a SIEM doesn't do you any good. It's one of those things, if you don't properly leverage it or approach it, then after the attack happens, you go and look, oh yeah, there was that alert 3 weeks ago. If somebody only would have seen that, we could have avoided all of this. And a lot of egg on the face. Yeah.
There's some tools, like the Palo ecosystem's got a bunch of different components that work together and do data log collection together and enact back and forth. So you can, your antivirus triggers an alert, which then triggers the firewall to put your endpoint into quarantine mode, right? All of those pieces talk together and they automatically happen. There's some pieces that do that. Otherwise, you got to have the tools and the knobs and the dashboards available for a human being to be able to act on it.
Yep. One of the more daunting, I think, components of the security theater is collecting the data, making sure you're collecting all the data relevantly in a way that you can actually digest it and act on it. One of our partners is Arctic Wolf does stuff like that too. They basically are and I'm not, we don't use this podcast as a pitch. It's just we've got good partners for good reasons, and that just comes to top of mind, where instead of having a person on staff watching this, and a lot of companies aren't staffed for 24/7.
Right.
They just aren't. So what happens when something happens in the middle of the night?
Right.
Well, Arctic Wolf is basically they are manning the dashboard, the NOC, 24/7 remotely, so they can do kind of mitigation and alerting that way, which is attractive to me. I'll tell you that. I mean, we couldn't. Yeah. Ivoxy couldn't have somebody on staff 24/7.
Right. I mean, they're doing. You get kind of that benefit of scale with going with a service like that, right? Is there's one guy watching 6 different customers, right? Because there isn't stuff happening all the time. It's a common alert dashboard, and when something happens, they've got a communication channel to say, hey, this is happening. That's the benefit there. At some point, like Amazon, Disney, giant companies, it makes sense to bring those in-house. I think it's a trade-off there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a good point about the scale. A lot of us are cringe to think about, well, we'll do web scale, and so many companies, I think, aren't the size to take advantage of the scale that the cloud can offer in terms of infrastructure. And well, you can spin up 1,000 VMs in a second on demand. Well, I only need like 80 VMs all the time, and that's it. But that's something where you could take advantage of the big bucket of human effort and data and really reap the benefits.
Yeah.
Outside of that, Matt, what is your most exciting? What's your favorite part of security? All those layers, all those pieces, all those things of the onion. What's your wheelhouse? What do you feel like is something that you're most equipped to dive into, and dovetail that with the effectiveness of what this single component could do, right? We talked about layers and necessary, but I've only got X number of dollars, Matt. So what should I spend on it first?
So
on the spot.
I know.
I nailed you.
As I've put together, as I've worked with a bunch of different customers and had to solve different problems for different people, my preferred viewpoint is to look at the user experience and build my environment to manage that. So this isn't a specific tool, but it's a way to build my environment and how to structure and conceptualize. If I have a data center in my office and I treat that data center as if it's in a colo in a different location, and I make everyone interact with that environment, that service that I'm providing, the same way, regardless of if they're in the office or not, then my work has become more narrower. I don't have to support 3 different access methods. I have one, which means my firewall rules can be better or simpler. My connectivity into my environment is simpler. I've narrowed my what's the word I'm looking for? My surface area of
attack surface.
My attack surface is smaller that way. So what I think is the most important is having a robust firewall to be able to monitor and protect your environment at the edge, logging in a way to review that, and then it gets into the question of how deep, how detailed do you need to segment your environment? Is microseg something? Right?
I like this, and I'm definitely doing a little, and this is for our WWF fans from the 80s and 90s. I'm going to Barry Horowitz this one. I give myself a little pat myself on the back there. And I will say this is where I'm proud to be part of a company like Ivoxy, because we're asking questions, and even if customer X says, let's talk about security, I need a new firewall, my old one's expired, let's go ahead and get a new firewall, and that's all I can do. And as somebody like Mr. Cozzolino is installing it, these discussion points are being brought up and talked about. It's not an upsell thing. It's just make sure you're aware of this. So when the next cycle comes, or budget frees up, or you have some time or desire to dive into really filling this solution out, think about these things. And yes, we've got a great firewall and all of this, but this is how that great money can be completely, mitigated with an attack around this side if you haven't, shored up this piece of your security posture. Or, have you had these conversations about buy-in with your C-level execs? Are they all in on this, or are they just looking at this as, well, that firewall's 5 years old, time to get a new one?
Right.
And I think that's a lot of the value. I mean, we are a consulting company, VAR, but I always say big V, big A. Value add. Yeah, we resell because we sell the products where solutions are built upon, but it's the value that we provide on top of that. And Kaz, I think you illustrated that really well.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm impressed. Well, I mean, security is a massive topic, and I know we're going to have a little bite-sized episode here, because I think rather than bite off the old porterhouse size, we're going to cut it into little pieces and kind of take a little bite.
How do you eat an elephant?
Right, the old 96er.
Yeah.
There's another 80s reference for you, for those out there. Yeah, and I don't know, Kazo will send you a picture of himself signed if anybody wants to email us and say what movie that reference is from. How about that?
There you go. Get some photo paper and inkjet it. Yeah.
Of course. Just no air conditioners this time. Next time, Matt. Yeah. Well, so I think that's going to wrap up this episode. We just wanted to take a little bit put a toe in and talk about some of the things, because really it's a shotgun birdshot blast of what does security mean, and you could go down any number of roads. And I think we just kind of wanted to paint with a wide brush today, and we will start picking that apart in subsequent episodes as we go deeper into the areas that security can cover. Yeah,
we can dive into some of the specifics of what's this tool do and how does that fit into the broader architecture. Yeah, I like
Absolutely. It. Thanks for bringing your expertise, Matt, and always good to chat with you.
Always.
And thanks everybody for listening to Data Center Therapy. Have a great day, y'all.